In a lively office buzzing with activity, employees are deeply engrossed in their work. Among them sits Howard, a young man in the advertising department of the renowned Grand Glory Limited. With his phone pressed to his ear, he professionally assures a caller that their request has been logged and the issue will be resolved within 3 days. It's a routine task, much like his everyday life, which feels like an endless cycle of work, day in and day out. Howard reflects on his career with a resigned sigh. The weight of his responsibilities is constant, and the clarity he once had about his future is now clouded by uncertainty. Yet, today, there's a momentary glimmer of satisfaction. He finally nailed a challenging task. But even this fleeting accomplishment is overshadowed by the looming sense of doubt about where he's headed. Just then, a senior colleague approaches, addressing him with an air of urgency. The man shares unsettling news. The company has been facing tough times and layoffs are imminent. The warning is clear. Howard needs to step up his efforts. Panic sets in as the implications of the conversation sink in. Before Howard can dwell on it, the man hands him a hefty book filled with potential clients. The task is straightforward yet daunting. Call every name on the list and report back by tomorrow. Howard, overwhelmed, wonders why he's being given this monumental task. To make matters stranger, someone nearby mentions a dream test, a bizarre concept rooted in advanced big data analytics. According to their calculations, Howard is the ideal candidate. Howard is baffled. A dream test? He's never even been interested in VR products, let alone wanted to be a part of such a project. The explanation follows. It's a cutting-edge simulation, an exclusive experience akin to a high-end VR game, where participants can live out different scenarios in a custom-built Dreamland. The concept feels absurd to Howard. He considers leaving, citing his work obligations. However, before he can step away, someone casually mentions that Dreamland includes a feature to recreate duplicates of real people and shape their experiences. The suggestion lingers provocatively. What if he could live as someone else? Another remarks, almost tauntingly, that Howard doesn't seem content with his current life. Amid the chaos, the atmosphere shifts as the boss enters, accompanied by the poised and confident Sabrina Liu, their newly appointed director. Introductions begin, with the boss highlighting the achievements of key team members. One worker, ever the opportunist, showers Sabrina with praise while crediting his success to the boss's guidance. Howard silently fumes at the blatant flattery, observing how this sycophantic behavior has propelled his colleague's career. When the spotlight turns to Howard, the boss dismissively refers to him as mediocre and lacking in interpersonal skills. Sabrina's curiosity about him is quickly brushed aside. A flashback reveals a stark contrast. Howard had once been praised by colleagues for securing a high-maintenance client, a feat that drew envious glares from others. Yet, his straightforward nature often clashed with superiors, including Mr. Wong, who had undermined him before. As the day winds down, the team exchanges goodbyes, preparing for another grind tomorrow. Alone with his thoughts, Howard reflects bitterly on his efforts. He believed that hard work would eventually earn him recognition, but reality has proven otherwise. Later, Donald, a fellow employee, advises him once again to play the game, to align with the boss's interests and secure his position. But Howard resents the idea, recalling how Donald had previously sabotaged others, turning their successes into stepping stones for his own gain. A question lingered in Howard's mind. Was this truly the right thing to do? Meanwhile, in a passing taxi, Donald observed Wong and Sabrina. Wong, always assertive, warned Sabrina not to waste her energy on the workers. Tomorrow would demand her full attention. Sabrina, unshaken, dismissed his concern with quiet confidence, her words layered with a resolute self-assurance. Wong, however, pressed on, hinting that her actions sent mixed signals. He worried they might encourage overreach. Unbeknownst to them, Howard overheard every word, his mind racing with unresolved tension. Howard had grown weary. Outside the workplace, his hard work often went unnoticed, overshadowed by the weight of discrimination. He had endured enough. A decision formed in his mind. Tomorrow, he'd seriously consider resignation. But tonight, his frustration demanded an outlet. Determined, he initiated the Dreamland system. His goal was clear: to scan Sabrina Liu and Mr. Wong for duplicates within the virtual space. Yet, an error flashed across the screen. Only one individual could be scanned at a time. The system prioritized Sabrina. The scan concluded, and Howard felt a pang of frustration. Why hadn't he been told earlier about this limitation? As his irritation flared, the system detected his emotional spike. A mechanized voice concluded he was enjoying this. He muttered about Sabrina's antics, half annoyed, half amused at the idea of an NPC servant modeled after her. The system reminded him that Dreamland would activate at midnight, leaving him just a few hours to rest. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Anxieties churned in Howard's mind, keeping him awake. The system intervened, activating a neural protocol to override his brain's sleep resistance. His consciousness faded into slumber. When he awoke, Howard found himself sprawled on the floor. Before him stood a girl, her presence commanding yet enigmatic. She introduced herself as AI-63, the voice that had been guiding him all along, now materialized as his Dreamland administrator. Howard rose, brushing off the moment's disorientation, and asked, "Has it started?" "Not yet," AI-63 replied. Supplies were necessary for the impending battles. With a gesture, she opened a door marked with the number 1, revealing a shop stocked with survival tools and weapons. Credit points became his currency, and each item carried a price. A machete for 2 points, a truck for 40, compressed food for 1. As Howard surveyed the items, his gaze landed on an endless power battery. Its potential fascinated him, but AI-63 warned him not to touch what he wasn't ready to purchase. Howard nodded, absorbing her advice. Strategic spending would be crucial. He inquired about NPCs, particularly strong ones. AI-63 informed him that a powerful NPC would cost an exorbitant 10,000 points. Howard's protest of robbery earned only a calm response. Then came the final moment. AI-63 declared that Dreamland would activate immediately. The Doomsday Survival door creaked open, revealing the challenge ahead. "Have fun," she said, her tone both encouraging and foreboding, before leaving him to face his fate. A faint, eerie glow spilled from the door, jolting Howard awake. Panic clawed at him as he lay in bed, his breath shallow and rapid. The familiar surroundings of his home greeted him, unchanged, unyielding. He scolded himself for his naivety. How foolish to think technology, in all its advancements, could conjure an entire world from nothing. With a resigned sigh, he resolved to shake off the remnants of his restless thoughts, freshen up, and head to work. The bathroom light flickered on, casting harsh shadows on the walls, only to plunge him into darkness as the power abruptly failed. Unease curled in his stomach as he dressed and stepped outside. The street was desolate, an unsettling emptiness hanging in the air. Where were the people? His thoughts halted as the roar of an airplane shattered the silence, its descent catastrophic. Howard froze, eyes wide, as the aircraft crashed in front of him, flames erupting into the sky. A voice, cold and automated, chimed from a nearby car. Mini Dreamland Doomsday Survival initiated. Level 0. Duration 180 days. Panic tightened his chest. 180 days? He whispered, disbelief flooding his mind. Before he could process, a stream of gasoline leaked from the wreckage, igniting a fiery explosion. He dove to the ground, the heat searing, chaos consuming him. Heart racing, Howard gathered his thoughts. The voice had posed a grim challenge. Survive in a world where humanity had vanished. Planes could plummet, disasters would strike, and supplies were finite. His mind churned. He needed food, water, shelter, medicine, tools, and transportation. The days stretched out before him, daunting yet finite. If he strategized carefully, he could endure, and perhaps even reclaim control of his life, using this time to prepare for a fresh start after his resignation. Determined, he scavenged. A radio caught his eye, its crackling static oddly comforting. Trinkets of no practical value became tokens of fleeting joy. Yet his musings about survival turned surreal as a tiger, unmistakably real, padded into view. Howard froze as the creature approached, its golden eyes steady. The tiger, a former petting zoo resident named Dummy, renowned for its friendly demeanor, licked his face with surprising gentleness. The absurdity of the moment struck him. Even in this simulated nightmare, no detail was overlooked. Days turned into weeks. By the 7th day, the water supply had failed, forcing him to rely on bottled reserves. Without refrigeration, food spoiled rapidly, and maggots infested everything. He scavenged what he could, from canned goods to heartier rations, but the looming specter of malnutrition gnawed at him. It was during one of these desperate searches that he stumbled upon salvation, the Blue Sky restaurant. Inside, a diesel generator hummed faintly, a relic of his childhood memories. It had kept the building powered for 7 days, but its whirring suggested imminent failure. The frozen meat was salvageable, but only just. He resolved to make this his base, working by day to gather supplies, and by night to cultivate land and prepare for long-term survival. By the 31st day, Howard's resolve wavered as the weight of isolation bore down on him. The city was a wasteland, a graveyard of rotting produce and relentless flies. Even the faint promise of fresh garlic sprouts, a hard-won victory, felt hollow amidst the stench and decay. At night, the suffocating darkness whispered of abandonment, and the wind carried only the echoes of a world long gone. Despair crept closer, but Howard clung to purpose. This game, cruel and unrelenting, was his to master, not the other way around. One day, as he drove aimlessly, his thoughts drifted to Sabrina Liu, the mysterious assistant promised to him in this simulated world. Was she real? A trick of the developers? His musings were interrupted by the sight of another car, a girl visible through its window. Howard's pulse quickened. Could it be Sabrina? In the dim light of the morning, Sabrina stirred awake, the coarse fabric of borrowed men's clothes brushing against her skin. A faint ache reminded her of the bandaged wound beneath, yet her curiosity outweighed the discomfort. She stepped toward the door, pushing it open to reveal a diesel generator humming steadily and shelves stocked with preserved food. No signs of the decay she had grown accustomed to. Howard's voice broke the silence, calm but laced with concern. He urged her to eat, presenting a modest meal he'd prepared. As she sat to eat, memories flickered in her mind. She remembered him, not the man before her now, but from a shared dinner after work, back when the world still spun on its ordinary axis. Hesitant, she asked his name. Howard, he replied, his voice tinged with recognition, as though he too saw glimmers of the past in her face. Sabrina's gaze drifted to the generator, the stocked shelves, and the patch of cultivated land beyond the door. "Did you do all of this?" she asked, her voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. Howard nodded, explaining his modest success in creating a semblance of stability. Then, turning the question back to her, he inquired about her journey. Her words carried a weight that hung heavy in the air. She spoke of her return to her hometown, now desolate, and the realization that Howard was the first living soul she'd encountered in a month. "What happened to the world?" she asked, her voice cracking under the enormity of the question. Howard could only shake his head. Answers eluded him as well. Their conversation flowed, tentative yet steady, like two survivors navigating the ruins of familiarity. Howard suggested they team up, a natural step in this new world where survival meant pooling resources. Sabrina agreed, albeit with a caveat. She needed boundaries, a distance between them, not just physically but emotionally. The declaration caught Howard off guard, a sharp reminder of their differences. Still, he agreed, rationalizing it as another facet of this strange new reality. Days passed, and their coexistence began to take shape. But tensions simmered beneath the surface. One morning, Howard awoke to the clatter of Sabrina reorganizing the warehouse, claiming it as her own space. She handed him a walkie-talkie, dismissively assuring him it would suffice for communication. The loss of the mannequin, a crude stand-in for companionship, stung Howard in ways he struggled to articulate. When she casually admitted to discarding it, he felt a pang of betrayal. Their tenuous alliance frayed further when Howard discovered a missing pistol from his collection. His accusations were met with Sabrina's exasperation, her patience wearing thin. She proposed separate routines, cooking and laundry apart, to avoid constant friction. Howard, though reluctant, conceded, interpreting it as a necessary measure for peace. Yet their differences continued to clash. Sabrina defended her guarded demeanor, citing her need for safety as a lone woman in uncertain company. Howard, stung by her assumptions, lashed out with bitter honesty, acknowledging her beauty and status, but rejecting the notion that her sense of security should come at his expense. Their words cut deep, exposing vulnerabilities neither had intended to reveal. Day 120. Howard stepped outside, greeted by a brisk, cooler breeze. He noted the subtle transformation. This world, once barren and alien, now brimmed with life. Sabrina's careful hand had lined the streets with vibrant, potted plants, their lush greenery turning the neighborhood into a picturesque sanctuary. The vegetable garden thrived under her management, solving the food crisis that had once loomed so heavily over them. Yet, despite these victories, silence stretched between them, a silence born from a quarrel 3 months ago. He wondered how anyone could endure such isolation for so long. He couldn't. The creak of the car door broke his thoughts. Donald, his steadfast companion, sat in the passenger seat. Howard mused aloud about Sabrina, questioning whether her fierce battle with the garden mice had fractured something deeper within her. She seemed to thrive now without human connection, pouring her energy into the land as if the plants were her only companions. Today's mission was clear: scout for new supplies. Howard grimaced as he recalled the state of the supermarket's meat section. Maggot-infested and inedible. "We'll die before those germs get us," he muttered. Fish might be a better alternative. Maggots they could endure. Bacteria they could not. He resolved to catch fish, a food that at least appeared palatable. Their route included a stop at the zoo, a place Howard visited with both dread and fascination. He had formed an uneasy bond with the tiger there, a magnificent creature that had somehow survived, adapting to the strange rules of this new world. As Howard approached, the tiger lay lazily, exuding both power and calm. He chuckled, giving it a good rub, marveling that this apex predator had managed to outlast so many others. The tiger's diet, however, was a grim reminder of the world they now inhabited. Herbivores turned into prey, survival dictating the rules. Howard tossed the last of the meat from his dwindling freezer stock, watching as the tiger devoured the offering. But the moment of peace shattered when the beast suddenly bolted, lunging at a deer. Howard's heart skipped. Deer didn't have antlers in this zoo. This was a creature from the outside, a stark symbol of nature reclaiming civilization. The sky began to darken, and Howard felt a shift in the air, heavy, oppressive. His instincts screamed danger. "A typhoon," he muttered, eyes scanning the horizon. But a force 10 typhoon here? They were far from the coast. The realization struck like a thunderclap. This wasn't reality. It was the game, a cruel challenge designed to test him. His thoughts darted to Sabrina. Every day, she rode her bike into the mountains. She should have reached the peak by now, but where was she? Fear gnawed at him as he sped toward the house, the storm bearing down. The streets that Sabrina had so meticulously adorned were now strewn with fallen plants, a chaotic mirror of the storm within him. The door to the house stood ajar. Sabrina wasn't back. His mind raced, envisioning her defiance against the storm, perhaps battling it as she had the mice. He could almost hear her commanding them to leave her tomatoes alone. The storm was unrelenting, pounding the world around them with rain and wind. Howard stopped his car suddenly when he saw Sabrina standing alone, holding onto a pole for support. Her phone's flashlight barely lit up her face, pale with fear. Her leg was injured, and she looked fragile, as if the storm had drained all her strength. She asked him quietly if she would die here. Howard, steady and firm, told her no. He lit a small fire with his lighter to bring some warmth and calm to the chaos around them. His eyes drifted toward the mountains and the dark outline of a mansion he'd forgotten was there. Sabrina used to ride her bike in this area often, but now she was far from the strong, adventurous person he remembered. Howard knelt beside her to check her injury, but she pulled away, insisting she was fine. He stood, his tone serious. "This isn't the time to act tough," he said. "If that wound gets infected, it could be dangerous." But Sabrina shook her head and insisted she could handle it on her own. With a frustrated sigh, Howard turned to the task at hand. "Fine," he said. "Here's the plan. This storm could flood everything in the valley. That mansion in the mountains is high enough to be safe. We'll move whatever we can there and use it as our shelter." Sabrina asked what she could do, but Howard shook his head. "With that leg, not much. Stay here, keep the fire going, and make sure the room is ventilated so you don't get poisoned by the smoke." Howard stepped out into the freezing rain, taking a deep breath to steady himself. His thoughts were racing. The storm wasn't just dangerous. It had already stripped them of almost everything. The generator was broken, the freezer ruined, and most of their food had gone bad or been washed away. All that remained was barely enough for 2 meals. Hunting or fishing in this weather wasn't an option, and even the animal burrows were flooded. "This is life," he muttered bitterly to himself. But there was no time for self-pity. He needed to act quickly. He thought of Donald, a friend who once warned him that living too cautiously left you unprepared for real challenges. That truth stung now as Howard realized how ill-equipped they were to face this disaster. Suddenly, a tiger appeared out of the shadows. Howard called the animal Dummy, a name born from their strange, uneasy companionship over the past months. He needed the tiger's sharp instincts and strength, but Dummy's wild nature made him unpredictable. Howard pleaded with the tiger to help him hunt, but the tiger roared and turned away, leaving Howard to fend for himself. The storm pressed on as Howard drove through the rain. Everything felt strange and dreamlike, too vivid to be real, yet somehow off. Sabrina, Dummy, the storm itself. They all seemed like shadows of something familiar but distant. Then he saw Sabrina lying on the ground. He slammed the brakes and rushed her aside. She was soaked and shivering, barely able to speak. She explained weakly that she had gone out to collect rainwater, wanting to pull her weight and not rely on him for everything. But her stubbornness had left her collapsed and helpless in the mud. Howard lifted her, despite her protests. She insisted he let her go, reminding him of their deal. She handled the house while he worked outside. But Howard had had enough. "Stop it," he snapped, his voice sharp. "I've got too much to deal with already. From now on, I'm making the decisions." Howard put Sabrina on the bed, telling her to stay put while he fetches the emergency kit. His tone was firm as he warned her against any reckless actions, adding that he would show no mercy if she did. Sabrina, frustrated, snapped that she could handle her wounds herself and didn't need his help. But Howard's expression remained serious as he reminded her that they were barely 2 meals away from starvation. He told her to recover quickly so she could help with the chores, otherwise they would both end up starving. As Howard tended to her wounds, Sabrina broke the silence by asking what his plan was. He explained that he had once seen some deer nearby, but they had run off. Tomorrow he planned to go hunting. Sabrina's curiosity sparked, and she asked about the deer. He confirmed they were wild deer that had taken over the land after people disappeared. Sabrina warned him that wild animals are quick to remember scents associated with danger and will stay highly alert. When she asked if he had scared the deer off before, he hesitated but eventually admitted that they might have sensed him. However, he reassured her that he had guns. Howard then mentioned finding a pistol under her pillow when packing essentials from their old place. He had left the bullet in it, just as it was. Sabrina picked up the gun, asking if he wasn't planning to use it. Howard responded that desperate times called for desperate measures and hoped this conversation would clear any misconceptions she had about him. He then urged her to rest since he needed to prepare for the hunt the next day. The snow continued falling outside as day 121 began. Howard stepped out, marveling at how the storm had transformed the surroundings. As he walked, he reflected on Sabrina's words from the night before. Her warnings about the deer had stuck with him. He realized he didn't know how to make traps and wasn't even sure if he had the courage to kill a deer. He carried a fishing net with him as a backup plan, hoping it could catch something without bait. He followed tracks in the snow, but each time he got close, the deer would vanish. This happened repeatedly, leaving him exhausted and frustrated. It felt as though the deer were deliberately avoiding him, making him question if they truly remembered his scent. Realizing he was wasting his energy, he decided to try his luck at a nearby lake. The lake was turbulent from the previous storm, but Howard cast his net anyway. When the net snagged something, he felt a flicker of hope, until it pulled so hard that he fell into the snow. Soaked and coughing, he cursed his bad luck. As he got up, shivering, he spotted a deer standing nearby. For a moment, he was stunned. Could this really be his chance? Frantically, he searched for his rifle, only to realize it was missing, probably lost in the water. He grabbed his shotgun instead, taking a deep breath as he aimed. But before he could steady himself, the deer bolted, startled by the blast of his shot. The recoil knocked him off balance, leaving him bleeding and angry at himself for another failure. Defeated, Howard made his way back to the cabin. On his way, he heard wolves howling. Fear gripped him as he turned to see 2 wolves sniffing the blood on his clothes. To his surprise, they didn't attack and simply walked away. Relieved, he hurried home. When he arrived, Sabrina was sitting on the bed and asked if he was back. He began removing his wet clothes, prompting her to look away, embarrassed. She asked him what he was doing, and he explained that he was freezing and needed the fire to warm up. She quickly told him there was no need to take off everything. Howard apologized and stopped, chuckling awkwardly. As he sat by the fire, Sabrina noticed a photo slipping out of his wallet. It was of him with a young woman. Curious, she asked if it was his girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, he replied simply. She asked why they had broken up, and he admitted that he had wanted a family but she hadn't been ready to settle down. Turning the topic to her, Howard teased that she must have admirers. Sabrina casually mentioned her boyfriend, Lawrence, a successful tech executive with a doctorate from MIT. Howard joked that Lawrence must be brave to date someone like her. Sabrina, offended, reminded him that she was his boss. Realizing she had overstepped, she quickly apologized. Just as the conversation was settling, her blanket slipped slightly, and they both froze in embarrassment. She quickly told him to stop staring and ordered him out. Howard raised his hands in surrender, saying he was leaving. As he stepped out, he muttered to himself about how ridiculous the day had been. His stomach growled, a harsh reminder of the worsening hunger. On days 122 and 123, Howard ventured deeper into the jungle. He observed the deer carefully, but no matter how stealthy he tried to be, he could only catch fleeting glimpses of their shadows. If he got too close, they vanished into the woods, making all his effort meaningless. He thought to himself that he would never touch a gun in real life, and that being a full-time hunter wasn't for him. His short-range weapon wasn't suitable for such a task either. He tried shooting at the deer several times, but none were caught. The inability to approach the deer felt like a death sentence. By days 124 and 125, Howard stayed home, tending to Sabrina's wounds. They had begun talking more often, and Sabrina, despite her condition, never complained about his failed hunts or their worsening situation. Howard admired her independence, though it concerned him. She was growing weaker. Her bones weren't healing, and she hadn't mentioned any stomach pain for a long time. He chose not to tell her about the wolves he'd encountered, knowing she would insist on sharing more responsibilities, even in her fragile state. Howard shared his plan with Sabrina. He had built a trap, just a simple pit lined with sharp wooden stakes and covered with cabbage leaves. He reasoned that in the harsh winter, the deer wouldn't resist such bait. Sabrina frowned, pointing out the risks of such strenuous work in his condition. Howard agreed, but explained that he lacked the strength to make another trap. They had no other choice. The next day would decide their survival. On the next day, Howard drove into the woods to check the trap. At first, it seemed empty, but then he noticed blood. Excitement surged through him. He must have caught something. He began tracking the wounded animal, desperate to find it. But as he followed the trail, he stumbled upon wolves devouring the deer. Furious, Howard shouted at them, firing shots in their direction. "That's mine," he yelled. The wolves, undeterred, dragged the remains away. Defeated, Howard stood there, seething, as the crushing weight of failure set in. He told himself this was just a game, but the despair felt far too real. On day 126, at 7:03 p.m., Howard shared the last of their food with Sabrina. She told him to keep it, feeling she didn't deserve to eat since she hadn't contributed. Howard snapped, asking her to stop being so stubborn. They were on the brink of death, and her pride wouldn't help them survive. Her silence broke as she revealed fragments of her past. Before turning 18, she had been a puppet controlled by her father. Most of her days were spent locked in her room, following his commands. While her brother played outside, she wasn't even allowed to dream. Her father claimed she was different and would leave the family one day, just like their mother had. He insisted she could only bring honor to their family by obeying him. Without their influence, he said she was nothing. Sabrina concluded that her independence was her way of rebelling against him. It was where her confidence stemmed from. She asked Howard if that sounded different from his beliefs. Howard admitted they were both struggling. He worked tirelessly, but was never rewarded, leaving him questioning whether hard work was even worth it. When Sabrina asked what set him apart, Howard hesitated before replying that his strength lay in his determination. Once he made up his mind, he didn't give up. She pressed further, asking if he had ever truly fought for what he wanted. She reminded him that the world is full of hard-working people, and standing out was the only way to be recognized. Howard, inspired, vowed to help her survive. He joked that he hoped his boss would acknowledge his efforts, even just once. Sabrina smiled faintly, but when he asked if she could let him help without resistance, she reluctantly agreed. Before leaving, Howard took some spinach leaves, declaring he would do his best for her. Then, pausing at the door, he added that if he didn't return by the third morning, she'd find his body by the creek in the suburban area. He hoped she would know what to do. Sabrina froze, fear flickering in her eyes as he left. Later, Howard reflected on his failures and the choices that led him here. He admitted that he often avoided challenges, preferring to complain instead of taking responsibility. This pattern, he realized, had affected his family, studies, relationships, and now even their survival. Determined to change, he resolved to stop blaming others and face his struggles head-on. Sabrina, meanwhile, had a vivid nightmare. In it, she held a knife and approached Howard. Blood splattered as she attacked, jolting her awake in terror. Trembling, she realized it was her first dream in months. Howard's parting words echoed in her mind. Would she truly have to resort to eating his body if he didn't return? Tears welled up as she grappled with a haunting thought. Day 127 found Howard gasping for breath in the forest. He paused by a lake, reflecting on the first time he had fallen into the water here. That moment had brought him closest to catching a deer, a chance he hadn't had since. As he stared at the lake, a thought occurred to him. Did the water mask his scent? It was only a theory, and he knew it might be a foolish gamble, but he decided to test it. Without hesitation, he stepped into the icy water. Back at the cabin, Sabrina was struggling to stay awake. She muttered to herself, urging her eyes to remain open. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, mocking her. He taunted her, claiming she wouldn't be in this position if she had followed the path he had set for her, a wealthy, comfortable life. His words cut deep, accusing her of being worthless and taking on more than she could handle. Furious, Sabrina yelled at the memory to leave her alone, determined to prove she could stand on her own. Her hand reached for the lone tomato. She remembered Howard's words, his hope that his boss would recognize his efforts, even just once. "You're amazing," he had said, wishing someone would acknowledge his value. Sabrina clenched her fists. She had promised herself she would wait 2 days for Howard to return, and she intended to keep her word. She resolved to wait until tomorrow. At 2:56 a.m., Sabrina lay in bed, restless. A mouse scurried near the tomato, and she whispered. No, her father's voice returned, laughing at her weakness. He mocked her choices again, telling her she wasn't capable of making it on her own. He painted vivid, grim images of festering wounds, maggots, and mice gnawing at her flesh. His voice dripped with disdain as he called her pathetic and fragile. Sabrina's anger flared. She gripped a gun and retorted that she didn't need him or anyone else to save her. Her life was her own, no matter how tragic it might become. Meanwhile, in the forest, Howard aimed his shotgun at a deer. The animal's reflection shone in the water as he prepared to shoot. At the same time, Sabrina killed the mouse scuttling near her. Howard fired his shot. The deer collapsed. Howard emerged from a pile of snow, panting and triumphant. He approached the fallen deer, laughing loudly. "I won," he shouted, overwhelmed by relief and pride. Back at the cabin, Sabrina sat on the bed, eating the tomato. Beside her, the dead mouse lay on a makeshift sizzler. Howard returned, bloodied but victorious, carrying the deer on his back. Sabrina stared in shock as he entered. He smiled, noticing her meal. "I see you're already eating," he said, collapsing to the floor. Concerned, Sabrina rushed to him and asked if he could stand. She spotted a piece of ice clinging to his clothes and wondered aloud if he had fallen into the river again. Later, strips of meat hung from a rod as water boiled nearby. Sabrina poured hot water into a bathtub, checking on Howard. He lay motionless, worrying her further. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand, startling her. "Sabrina," he whispered weakly. She leaned closer, confused. "Have I earned your recognition?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sabrina was taken aback, but replied honestly. "You're amazing. Without you, everything would have fallen to pieces." Howard chuckled faintly, recalling the last words his ex-girlfriend had said before leaving him, that he had nothing, and his hard work would never amount to anything. Sabrina agreed it was hard to gain recognition in the world, but her tone softened as she began preparing dinner. "The broth is ready," she announced, urging him to eat. But Howard remained too weak to move. Sabrina carefully fed him the broth, ensuring he got some sustenance. Hours passed, and though she had wrapped him in 3 thick quilts, Howard continued to shiver. His trembling filled her with sadness. Finally, Sabrina made a decision. She removed her clothes and climbed into bed with Howard. Wrapping her arms around him, she whispered softly, "Everything is fine. You'll be fine." On day 130, Howard woke up feeling groggy. As his senses sharpened, he noticed Sabrina's hand resting lightly on him. Turning his head to look, his heart skipped a beat. Sabrina was lying right behind him. The sight of her so close made his face flush red, and he couldn't stop himself from observing her figure. It crossed his mind that she might be naked, though he quickly shook the thought away. Embarrassment crept in as he tried to calm himself. Before he could move, Sabrina stirred, her voice soft but firm as she told him to wake up. She pulled her hand back instinctively, but Howard reflexively grabbed it. "No," he murmured, explaining he still felt ill. Almost immediately, his own words startled him. What was he saying? Would she misunderstand his intentions? Panicking, he released her hand, trying to recover from the awkwardness. Sabrina, however, didn't dwell on it. Instead, She reminded him of a conversation they had before about his ex-girlfriend. "Can you tell me again why you two broke up?" she asked. Howard repeated what he had told her before, that his girlfriend thought they were too young to settle down. Sabrina wasn't satisfied with the simple answer and pressed him further. "Was there another reason?" she inquired. After a brief hesitation, Howard admitted, "I wanted a family. That's what I wanted, but she wasn't ready." Hearing this, Sabrina leaned closer and embraced him tightly. "So do I," she whispered, her voice steady. Howard, feeling the warmth of her embrace, asked her why she worked so hard to prove her independence. Sabrina sighed, explaining that she had always tried to prove herself, to break through the restraints that others in society had placed on her. "But does success make me independent?" she questioned aloud. "No, that's just a line I drew for myself. But the closer I get to it, the more trapped I feel." She admitted that despite everything, she had never truly made a decision solely for herself. "How can I call myself independent?" she asked. Howard, uncertain how to respond, confessed, "I don't know. I've never drawn lines like that for myself." The conversation took a surprising turn when Sabrina asked, "Would you have a family with me?" The boldness of her question left Howard stunned and silent. Realizing her forwardness, Sabrina quickly apologized, saying she hadn't thought it through before asking. She admitted that she still needed to figure out her own life. Howard, however, held her hand firmly and assured her, "No, that's exactly what I want." He explained how, for so long, his hard work had pushed him further from his dream of having a family. Yet now, with her, it felt within reach. Sabrina reassured him. "We'll survive," she said confidently. The vulnerability of the moment brought them closer, and as the night deepened, their connection became physical. Howard's inexperience soon became evident. Flustered, he admitted he didn't know how to proceed. Sabrina took the lead, only for Howard to nervously blurt out, "Is this even appropriate?" "My wife." Sabrina interrupted him with a light slap, reminding him they weren't married. "We're just two consenting adults," she clarified. "We live together based on mutual respect and support. Don't get ahead of yourself." Howard sheepishly agreed, and the night unfolded with newfound intimacy. The following month brought challenges but also a sense of partnership. The deer they had hunted earlier were long gone, their meat consumed as the harsh winter persisted. The river had frozen solid, forcing them to carve holes in the ice for fishing. Despite the conditions, Sabrina took on extra responsibilities. Together, they worked on constructing a greenhouse to grow vegetables, a project that was nearly complete. Howard, still recovering from frostbite, helped as much as his lingering injury allowed. One morning, before Howard left to hunt, Sabrina stopped him, saying she had a surprise for him. Howard blushed, expecting a kiss or something romantic, but she handed him a poncho made from deer hide. Grateful, he accepted it with a small laugh, noting it wasn't quite what he had imagined, but was still incredibly practical. Out in the wilderness, Howard stumbled upon the body of a deer. Feeling fortunate, he continued his journey, eventually reaching a petting zoo. The sight of the zoo brought back memories of a goat he had named Dummy, one of the few living creatures he had bonded with. As he approached, he heard a low growl and rushed to investigate. Wolves were attacking a tiger, their ferocity shocking him. Howard fired his rifle into the air, scaring the wolves away, but it was too late for the tiger. Gravely injured, it let out a final, mournful growl before collapsing. Howard's focus shifted to Dummy. The tiger was alive but in visible pain. As he knelt beside him, memories of their time together flooded his mind. Guilt and sorrow weighed heavily on him as he realized what needed to be done. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. With a heavy heart, he aimed his gun and ended Dummy's suffering. Overwhelmed, he silently vowed to avenge him. Back home, Sabrina noticed Howard's somber demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked. He brushed off her concern, saying it was nothing and urging her to stay indoors for the next few days. The outside world, he explained, was too dangerous. Sabrina agreed, mentioning she had plenty to do in the greenhouse. Howard, now alone with his thoughts, reflected on how much he had longed for a loving home. He had achieved it, but it came with the constant threat of danger. Resolving to protect what he had built, he prepared to face the wilderness again. During a hunt, Howard watched wolves encircle a deer, their sharp instincts on full display. He moved stealthily, shooting and injuring one of the wolves. Knife in hand, he approached to finish the job but was jolted awake. Sabrina, concerned, asked if he was all right. Howard reassured her, downplaying the vivid nightmare. Yet the images lingered, a reminder of the challenges they faced in this unforgiving world. On the 170th day, Howard kept track of time with precision, marking each passing moment since the hunt for the wolves had begun. 10 relentless days, and yet the 2 remaining wolves had vanished, leaving no trace. Despite their absence, their fearsome gazes still haunted him, a vivid reminder of the threat they posed. He knew recklessness could be his downfall, just as it had been for Dummy. And Howard wasn't ready to die, not yet. Only when the last of the wolves were gone could he allow himself the fragile peace that eluded him. Sabrina interrupted his brooding that evening, her voice carrying a hopeful lilt. She announced she'd made steamed fish and roasted meat, proudly claiming her cooking skills had improved. She urged him to join her, to savor the meal together. But Howard, preoccupied with his task, shook his head. He had other plans. He needed to clean the tent and pack jerky for an upcoming trip that would take several days. Disappointment clouded Sabrina's face. She protested softly, reminding him how distant he'd become, leaving early, returning late, always consumed by something else. Her plea was simple: stay for dinner just this once. But Howard apologized, explaining that he couldn't rest until he completed something important. When she pressed for details, silence fell between them. Howard wrestled with the truth. He couldn't tell her how dangerous the hunt had become. Sabrina was too proud to remain on the sidelines. Instead, he brushed it off as trivial. But Sabrina saw through his words, her tears betraying the hurt she felt. 3 days later, on the 173rd day, Sabrina awoke to the sound of hammering. She found Howard boarding up the windows with wooden planks. Confused, she asked what he was doing. He replied simply, it was getting colder, and he wanted to reinforce the windows before the worst of the weather hit. But Sabrina wasn't convinced. She challenged him, saying she'd never asked for this protection. Howard deflected her frustration, changing the subject and asking if there was any food ready. He acted as if the tension between them didn't exist, as if they weren't drifting apart. Sabrina, however, couldn't hold back. She admitted that their relationship had been rushed, built in the heat of survival. Her voice cracked as she asked if he saw it as nothing more than a fleeting connection. Howard's response was firm. Everything he had done was for their home, for her safety. But Sabrina's anger simmered. She reminded him that their home was built on mutual respect. She demanded he tell her what was going on, what was truly on his mind. Howard hesitated, then reminded her of their agreement. She would stay home while he handled the dangers outside. He assured her there was nothing she could do to help, and all he asked was for her to wait a few days. Sabrina's shoulders slumped, sadness overtaking her as she walked away. As snow began to fall in earnest, Howard's focus shifted. The wolves' tracks would soon vanish under the heavy drifts, and the bitter cold threatened their survival. Temperatures were plunging to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and the hunt was no longer viable. Now, his priority was ensuring they had enough supplies to endure the worsening weather. At the hardware store, Howard gathered nails, iron wire, and tape, everything he needed to fortify their home. His fingers brushed against a manual, and he paused to examine it. It was for diesel generator maintenance. Hope flickered in his chest. With this, he could finally bring power back. But as he flipped through the pages, the crackle of static caught his attention. The store's dusty TV flickered to life, and the AI-63 appeared. Her words were chilling. She reminded him that the doomsday survival dream was about to become reality, and in just 1 week, everything would change. Howard's chest tightened as the weight of a revelation bore down on him. Back at home, Sabrina was packing her suitcase. She left a note taped to the door. We need a break. Don't come after me. Her tears blurred the words as she stepped into her car. She hesitated for a moment, casting a final glance at their home before driving away. Meanwhile, at the store, Howard zipped his bag, satisfied he'd gathered the tools needed to fix the generator. But as he prepared to leave, a wolf emerged from the shadows. Its eyes burned with fury, a reflection of the vengeance it sought for its fallen packmates. Howard stood his ground, but the fight that followed was brutal. The wolf lunged, teeth flashing, and Howard countered with his knife. The struggle was savage, with Howard's blade breaking under the wolf's relentless attack. Blood splattered as he fought desperately, using the broken knife to deliver the final, fatal blow. He stood over the wolf's lifeless body, chest heaving, his own injuries painting the snow crimson. As he began to leave, a flashback surfaced, his conversation with AI-63. He had pleaded with her for answers. Would this world continue once he was gone? What would happen to Sabrina? She was his wife, his anchor in this fractured reality. He couldn't abandon her. But the fight wasn't over. The dead wolf stirred, launching a final, desperate attack. Its teeth sank into Howard's arm, and he grimaced in pain. Through gritted teeth, he snarled at the creature, vowing to survive. For Sabrina, for the life they had built. In the car, Sabrina's tears fell freely as the road stretched before her. At the store, Howard, bloodied and battered, pushed forward. His steps carried him away from the past, toward an uncertain future shaped by both love and survival.